Music. Every army experiences its first victory in war, and eventually its last. The last tactical, some say the last operational success of the German Wehrmacht, already in its death throes, 2 months before its capitulation, was from the 2nd to the 5th. The Battle of Lauban, which lasted from March 2nd to 5th, 1945. Along with the recapture of this lower Silesian city, which had been partially taken by the Red Army, the main line of resistance, or front, that had been established there was indeed restored. It was held until the total capitulation on May 8th. Lauban, known as Lublin in Polish since 1945, is a lower Silesian city located about 24 kilometers east of Görlitz. In 1815, with the treaties of the Congress of Vienna, it, together with East Upper Lusatia, fell to Prussia. In 1816, it was assigned to the Prussian province of Silesia, and there to the administrative district of Liegnitz. Until 1945, Lauban was the administrative seat of the district of Lauban. While 16,436 people still lived there in 1939, after the effects of the war, flight, and forced expulsion, there were only 6,846 in 1946, including 1,617 Germans. By 1948, there were only 200 Germans left among the 9,269 inhabitants, marking the end of the German presence in Lauban's history. Lauban is also known to historians because Abraham Hosmann, who became known in history as the Silesian fabricator, was born there in 1561. The son of a shoemaker, after studying in Jena, received commissions as an imperial historiographer to conduct genealogical research and write chronicles from various Silesian noble families and cities, but he more or less invented all of them. And, as is often the case with beloved historical forgeries that fit the spirit of the times, those by Hosmann were repeatedly used by historians, until they were exposed in the 19th century. Later, the Silesian historian Holmer Grönhagen described the way he turned historical forgery into a full-fledged profession, and the audacity he developed in doing so is almost without example in all of history. Hosmann died in 1617. Allegedly, he was killed by peasants while traveling near Magdeburg. And of course, Lauban became known to a global audience through the photograph taken on the 8th or 9th of March 1945, taken in the courtyard of the Pestalozzi School, showing the awarding of the Iron Cross Second Class to Hitler Youth member Wilhelm Willi Hübner, who served as a messenger, among other roles, in the Führer Grenadier Division, by the battle commander of Lauban, Major of the Reserve, Max Chueschke, and the subsequent congratulations from propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. While the other Hitler Youth members had been evacuated, Hübner had voluntarily stayed behind. However, it can also be stated that combat missions involving the majority of the younger Hitler Youth members only took place sporadically during the final phase of the war, such as in the last battles in Berlin. And it was only Goebbels's propaganda department that repeatedly presented such child soldiers. As for the direct defense of Lauban, Chueschke was in command of the Reserve Grenadier Battalion 318 and 2 local Landesschützen battalions. So what was the situation in February 1945? Since the 8th of the month, the offensive by the 1st, which numbered around 1 million soldiers, had been underway. Ukrainian front, under Marshal Ivan Konyer, the Soviet Lower Silesian operation was underway, which lasted until the 24th. For this, I will quote from Wikipedia. When the Red Army soldiers marched into Silesia, they committed countless crimes of all kinds against the population and the German soldiers. They looted, murdered indiscriminately, Sometimes, after excessive alcohol consumption, individuals or groups brutally raped women of all ages, fired on columns of refugees, and destroyed property. A reliable picture of the crimes emerged at the crime scenes, where the German counterattacks, such as in March 1945 at Lauban and Stregau, were successful and official investigations were initiated. Here you see the investigation commission working in Lauban, whose reports are so gruesome that I won't mention any details. In the last third of February, the exhausted and decimated Wehrmacht units of Army Group Center and Colonel General Ferdinand Schörner managed to stabilize the main front line in Silesia. This line ran roughly from Oppeln in the south up to Guben in the north. Northeast of Görlitz, south of Penzig, stood the southern flank of the German 4th Panzer Army. In loose formation, and connected to that, the left flank of the 17th Army in the area of Lauban. Against this junction, the Soviet command tried with their 3rd Guards Tank Army to break through, in order to once again smash the German main line of defense that had just barely been re-established. For this, the 3rd Guards Tank Army first wanted to take the nearest targets, Lauban and Görlitz, but they were met with stubborn resistance from the 6th. Volksgrenadier Division was only able to capture the northern part of the so-called six-town Lauban, accompanied by numerous acts of rape and subsequent murder. The name Sechstadt is derived from Upper Lusatia, which included the towns of Bautzen, Görlitz, Kamenz, Lauban, Lübau, and Zittau, and existed from 1346 until the Congress of Vienna in 1815. All the German major units deployed in this combat area still carried the designation division, but in reality they were severely depleted, damaged, merely replenished, and cobbled together, weak combat groups that, by the assessment criteria up to 1943, would have been classified as unfit for action. Neither were the always understaffed staffs well coordinated, nor were the battalions and regiments, which were filled up to 90% with quickly trained, very young soldiers, very resilient. There, under General of the Armored Troops Friedrich Kirchner, stood the 57th Panzer Corps, which included the unit on the 26th. On January 26, 1945, the Führer Escort Division, which had evolved from the Führer Escort Brigade under Major General Otto Ernst Rehmer, had only 40% operational readiness of its armored vehicles. After its deployment at the Vistula, Lauban, and Radibor, this division was destroyed at the end of April 1945 in the Kauscha Pocket. Here is the video for that. Kauscha Pocket, 1945. City of the destruction of the SS Division Frundsberg and the Führer Escort Division. Rehmer, who became known for his, although overrated, role as a major and commander of the Berlin Guard Battalion during the suppression of the coup attempt on the 20th WWII. In June 1944, after the war, he became active in right-wing extremist organizations and evaded German prosecution in 1994 by fleeing into Spanish exile, where he died in 1997. There was the 8th Panzer Division with only 35 operational armored vehicles under Colonel Heinz Hax, who became known as a first lieutenant in the modern pentathlon through his successful participation in the Olympic Games in 1928, 1932, and 1936. After the surrender in Pilsen, Hax was handed over by the Americans to the Soviet Union, which sentenced him to 25 years of forced labor. He was then in Soviet captivity until early October 1955, and on the 3rd September 1956, he joined the Bundeswehr as a brigadier general and became commander of the 3rd Armored Division in Buxtehude. In 1958, he was deputy commanding general of the 3rd Corps in Koblenz. He retired on the 31st March 1961 as a major general of the Bundeswehr. Then there was the city that was incorrectly marked on the map near Lauban. In reality, the 16th was stationed near Marklisse Panzer Division with 47 operational armored vehicles and Major General Dietrich von Müller, who on the 19th April 1945 was captured by Czech partisans and later handed over to the Red Army. One day after his capture, he was promoted to lieutenant general. Dietrich von Müller did not return from captivity until the winter of 1955. The 16th Panzer Division, which he took command of in August 1944, suffered heavy losses on the 22nd. In February, it was reinforced with emergency troops, Hitler Youth, and, on the 28th, joined with the Panzer Division Jüterbach, which was formed on February 28th at the Jüterbach training ground, bringing the division to the nominal strength of a brigade. After its brief and not very effective deployment in the Lauban combat area, the division was relocated to other hot spots and dissolved in Lower Silesia at the end of the war. Additionally, 2 infantry divisions were available, including Division No. 408, which had originally been formed in Breslau in 1942 only to command replacement units. 408, which was renamed Division L for Liegnitz, in February 1945. The commander was the ailing Lieutenant General Heinrich Vosch, who was released from American captivity in 1947. His division, as well as the other division whose name is not known, played no role in the fighting at Lauban. Then there was also Panzer Brigade 103 with the attached Panzer Regiment ZBV Coburg, as of January 20, 1945, and Major General Werner Mummert of the reserve. After several attacks against Soviet units advancing on Görlitz, the brigade was relocated to the Lauban area at the end of February 1945, where, however, parts of it were encircled, which were then, at the beginning of March, together with the 1st Battalion of Panzer Regiment 29, which had been subordinated to Panzer Brigade 103, were freed with considerable losses. After that, from March 5th, the remaining parts of the brigade were used to form the Panzer Division Müncheberg, led by Major General Mummert of the reserve. On April 25, 1945, during the final battle for Berlin, Mummert and his division took over Defense Sector D. There is an account of the events of the final battles for the capital of the Reich in my video Berlin, April 26–2, May 1945. Chronology of the military catastrophe from the German perspective. Mummert managed to break out of Berlin with the remnants of his units. However, he was captured by Soviet soldiers outside the city on May 3rd and died on the 28th. He died on January 28, 1950, in prisoner of war camp No. 71 Shuja in the Soviet Union. Another large unit available was the 39th Tank Corps under the command, as of the 21st, General of the Armored Troops, Karl Decker, who took his own life near Braunschweig on April 21, 1945. His corps led the Führer Grenadier Division, which was formed from the Führer Grenadier Brigade near Cottbus on January 26, 1945, and Major General Helmut Maeder, here still a colonel. Maeder, whose division had only 36 of its armored vehicles operational, was in Soviet captivity until October 1955. In September 1957, he joined the Bundeswehr as an Oberst, serving among other roles as commander of the infantry school in Hammelburg, and finally as head of the troop office in Cologne, until he retired as a lieutenant general in 1968. Furthermore, after heavy losses on the Vistula, There was only the so-called Kampfgruppe 17, which was formed in January 1945 near Forst, with just 35 operational armored vehicles, Panzer Division or Colonel Theodor Kretschmer. The division that was successful at Lauban, which in reality only had the strength of a tank regiment, was then overrun by Soviet troops near Olmütz at the end of April. Its commander, Kretschmer, who was promoted to Major General, remained in Soviet captivity until November 1945. Finally, alongside another unknown infantry division, the 39th was present. An armored corps was available just northwest of Lauban, mistakenly marked here as the 16th Panzer Division, which on the 9th October 1944 formed from the 6th Grenadier Division, the already mentioned 6th Volksgrenadier Division, Major General Otto Hermann Brücker. Its units were at the Warka bridgehead on the Vistula on January 14. It was completely destroyed, with 2 of its infantry regiment commanders killed, as well as 5 of the 6 battalion commanders and 1 artillery battalion commander. Accordingly, the losses in the companies were just as severe. After that, the division was reinforced with alarm and Volkssturm units, and then had 5 battalions and 1 artillery battalion. After intense fighting at Lauban, during which the 6th Volksgrenadier Division, despite its lack of personnel, had proven to be a capable fighting force, on the 10th April 1945 in the 6th. It was renamed the 6th Infantry Division. Brücker was in Soviet prisoner of war captivity until October 55. Let's start our look at the Battle of Lauban right away with the 6th Volksgrenadier Division. Both during the day and at night, the division was repeatedly attacked by strong tank units in February. In Soviet tactics, always with packs of 15 to 20 tanks, usually staggered over time. However, this had always given the division the opportunity to regroup its otherwise completely inadequate anti-tank defenses against the expected tank attack. By March 2nd, it reported over 100 Soviet tanks destroyed in the area between Hennersdorf, Wünschendorf, and Schreibersdorf East. However, it had received active support in doing so from the Flak Assault Regiment 1, which had already been deployed in Silesia since January under Colonel Georg Lünker, as well as from the battle group of Colonel Hans Ulrich von Luck und Witten. Around this time, the High Command wanted to put its intention into action to liberate Breslau, which was surrounded about 130 kilometers east of Lauban and declared a fortress. However, to do that, they first had to fight their way through at Lauban again. The important railway connection via Görlitz and Hirschberg to Upper Silesia was crucial for the operational deployment of the troops and the supply transports of Army Group Center. Additionally, they hoped this would help the far-advanced 30. Soviet Guards tank army could be struck so severely that their further advance toward the major railway junction at Görlitz and onward to Dresden could be prevented. In addition, this was also intended to liberate Lauban, which was partially occupied by the Soviet Army. The task was assigned to Army Group Center under the command of the fanatical National Socialist Colonel General Ferdinand Schörner, who was called Bloody Ferdinand by his soldiers because of his ruthless conduct of battle. After the recapture of Lauban, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels wrote on the 12th March in his diary. On this occasion, I recommend taking a look at the diary of this non-soldier, which is available in PDF format, to understand how this man thought. I then report to the Führer in detail about my visit to Lauban. The Führer also believes that Schörner is one of our most outstanding military leaders. It is thanks to him that the morale of the troops there has been raised so excellently. I report to the Führer about the radical methods that Schörner uses to achieve this goal. Deserters find no mercy with him. They are hanged from the nearest tree, and a sign is hung around their neck with the inscription, "I am a deserter. I refused to protect German women and children, and was therefore hanged." Schörner, who was appointed as the last German Colonel General of the Army to Field Marshal on April 5, 1945, had on the 9th. On May 9th, dressed in civilian clothes, he fled to Austria by plane and was handed over to the USSR by the Americans. He remained in their captivity until 1955, then, in 1957 in the Federal Republic. He was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for manslaughter, from which he was released after 1960. He passed away in 1973. The operation to recover Lauban was called Gemse and was initiated by the Commander-in-Chief of the 17th Army, General of the Infantry, Friedrich Schulz, who, however, had to hand over command at the end of February due to a shrapnel wound to General of the Armored Troops Walter Nering. He then formed from the general command of his 24th Army Corps the command staff of an armored group and thus took over the large area of Lauban, which had previously been covered by the 5th Armored Corps. As a reserve that only he could deploy, Nering had the heavily armored Panzer Regiment 79 with 11 companies, which he repeatedly used successfully at the hot spots. His attack plan provided for the weak 6th in the center, Volksgrenadier Division, relying on the tenacity this division had shown in the previous weeks despite the risk. 2 armored wings were ready for the wide encirclement of Lauban. The stronger right one with the 57th Panzer Corps up to the area southwest of Löwenberg. The left wing with the 39th Panzer Corps on the route from Görlitz to Bunzlau, Polish Bolesławiec. Shortly before the start of the operation, the High Command of the Panzer Group moved its command post to the village and estate of Tratlau, today Dorfungut Tratlau, about 15 kilometers south of Görlitz, which today, like so much that was formerly German in Poland, has been left to decay. Then, with the start of the attack, it moved to Görlitz. Gut Hartmannsdorf, Polish Wilorzów, 3 kilometers south of Marklissa, today Marklisha, and with the advancing attack then to the outskirts of Lauban. The relocation of the units took place under strict secrecy by rail transport and, despite the blatant ongoing shortage of fuel, also by marching overland. Then, largely unnoticed by the Soviet units, the attack began on Friday, the 2nd of March. The Führer Grenadier Division under Major General Mader launched the attack. Over Stolzenberg north towards Kieslingswalde, then the line continued to Oberbillau and Guntersdorf, with the fighting in the forest area there lasting until the 3rd. On the afternoon of March 3rd, the fighting was so intense and costly that the planned rapid advance toward Naumburg, which was encircled by the Red Army, became impossible. Therefore, and also because the 17th Panzer Division Battle Group was the left neighbor of the Führer Grenadier Division, had made good progress on the road to Bunzlau and had reached the area west of Guntersdorf, thus covering the flank and rear of Mader's division. Did General of the Armored Troops Nering spontaneously decide to now complete the attack to the east in a general direction? To turn off at the blue-marked river Quais, Polish Quais, after which the 17th Panzer Division pushed into the rear of the Soviet units standing to its right during the night. Since it frequently encountered retreating Soviet units, it was able to achieve good successes, especially in the Quais Valley, with minimal own losses. The 6th Volksgrenadier Division had followed the attack of the Führer Grenadier and by the evening of the 4th, by March had advanced south and west of Guntersdorf up to the road to Bunzlau, where it captured plenty of spoils from the Soviet division that had retreated there. From this, an anti-tank company was formed with 16 ZS-3 divisional guns, the so-called Rachbum, 2 heavy batteries with 12 Soviet guns, and a weak tank company with 10 T-34s. As mentioned, at the same time as the Führer Grenadier Division, Kampfgruppe 17 was also positioned hard to the northeast of Görlitz. The tank division was deployed along a broad front. Near the village of Gruna, they were able to take out 70 T-34s, and near Florsdorf 10. After their further advance in the early morning of March 3rd, the Soviet 9th Mechanized Corps was heavily decimated, with 48 guns captured west of Guntersdorf. At that time, the press reported on the successes of the 17th Panzer Division, among other things. In the area between Görlitz and Lauban, an armored battle group led by Lieutenant Colonel Prince Friedrich Ferdinand zu Schleswig-Holstein and the armored group of Colonel von Lug managed to inflict heavy losses on the Russians. 33 tanks and 34 anti-tank guns were destroyed in this area alone. Heavy fighting also took place at the 57th Panzer Corps under General of the Armored Troops Kirchner. East of Lauban, the 8th attacked. The 8th Panzer Division under Major General Hax attacked via Hax, Tiemendorf, and Mauerek towards Sächsisch-Hauxdorf, then met on the 4th. On March 4th, with the Führer Grenadier Division and Major General Mader in a joint successful attack on Lindenberg east of Logau. At the same time as the other divisions, the Führer Escort Division was also involved, under its personally brave, to be sure, but completely inexperienced in command, as a 32-year-old division commander, under Major General Raymer, advancing from the area of Gunzendorf, and had to repel strong attacks against its outer flank in the area of Neudank, Kesselsdorf, and Giesmannsdorf, which severely hindered its advance. It was only on March 5th that their left wing managed to take possession of Silberberg, which was fiercely defended by Soviet troops northeast of Logau, and thus establish a connection to the 8th Tank Division of Major General Hax. On the afternoon of March 5th, the first elements of the 16th, which had meanwhile arrived from Mark Glisser, also arrived. Tank Division and Major General von Müller between the 8th Tank Division and the Führer Escort Division under Raymer were inserted, but due to their unstable composition, they did not make much progress. However, that no longer played a major role, since the fighting to recapture Lauban had essentially already been successfully completed. If we now look at this last German operational success in conclusion, its popularity was mainly due to the strong propaganda exploitation by Minister Goebbels. Thus, the former Second General Staff Officer IB in the Panzer Corps Großdeutschland, Major A.D. Helmut Spater, writes in Volume 3 of his work about the Panzer Corps. Only a few days after the capture of Lauban, a call came from Field Marshal Schörner to immediately send a battalion to Lauban, which was to participate during a visit to Lauban by Reich Minister Goebbels, especially since the minister wished to deliver a speech to the frontline soldiers. After much back and forth, we finally managed to gather about 100 men. Praises for Schörner, praises for Goebbels. Some Hitler youth are awarded the Iron Cross. None of the men from the units receive an award. In reality, the local military success was very limited, which is why this battle at Lauban is barely mentioned even in Soviet documentaries about the Great Patriotic War. Although Lauban had been recaptured, neither was the delay of the Soviet 3rd Tank Army's units achieved, nor was the encirclement of the 7th Guards Tank Corps at Naumburg successful on their way to Silesia and then Berlin by the Soviet 3rd Tank Army, Guards Tank Corps, and the 9th Mechanized Corps, since the majority had managed to break out. This also rendered the second phase of the plan, the liberation of encircled Breslau, obsolete. However, there were once again numerous dead on both sides, who, if at all, were quickly buried somewhere. The 3rd Soviet Guards Tank Army under Colonel General Pavel Rybalko, which, contrary to claims still made today, was by no means almost destroyed, reported from January 12th to 12th, March 1945, losses of 1,883 killed, 6,527 wounded, and 326 missing, in addition to 268 tanks and 81 self-propelled guns. But just a month later, in April 1945, played an important role in the capture of Berlin. There are no official records regarding the German personnel losses in the Battle of Lauban, and the 3rd Guards Tank Army's claim of 28,500 German dead and 500 captured soldiers after the Lower Silesian operation should be treated with caution. The only thing that is certain is that the German military losses were at least as high as those of the Red Army. However, the greatest losses were suffered by the German population, which often consisted only of the elderly, women, and children. Almost every 6th Silesian had become a victim of war, murder, or deportation.